Alright, hey guys, this is Jonathan over at American Off-Road Customs. We are doing a bunch of upgrades on this 392, but I wanted to take an opportunity while we got it mostly put together to talk about depth wobble and front end of these vehicles, and a lot of questions that we come across with this. Why do I have depth wobble? Why is it so hard to diagnose? I don't understand what these parts are and why I need them and why it's important. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to kind of showcase some of that and explain a lot of what's going on here. And this is not just a Jeep specific thing. This is true for pretty much any solid axle vehicle. So, you got your Broncos and stuff that have independent front suspension. It's going to be different. But if you've got an F-250 that's got a solid front axle, this same kind of stuff applies. There might be some slight differences, some of the specifics, but overall, it's the same general concept. So, generally speaking, we're talking about a depth wobble problem. There are two main factors that are usually the culprit when we're looking at these vehicles as far as what causes the wobble. Biggest one is going to be boost parts. So anything in here that is not tight or is moving around when it's not supposed to can cause a wobble. The other issue is anything climate related. And a lot of times, when you've lifted your vehicle and you haven't taken the necessary steps to compensate for that lift, the alignment is not set the way it needs to be. That puts added stress on some of these components. And it may not wobble right away, but then 6 months later, it's like, why am I wobbling all of a sudden? Because the alignment being wrong, it wants to wobble. And now that some of those new parts aren't as tight as they were when they were new, they're moving around and allowing that wobble to happen. So the way you can avoid that is, number one, making sure that all those parts are tight. The biggest one is going to be your track bar up here. So this bar right here going across on the front of the vehicle ties the frame to the axle. This keeps this axle centered on the Jeep. So it allows us to shift it this way or this way in relation to the body. If that moves when it's not supposed to move, that allows steering to be affected. That's where wobble comes from. Making sure this is tight, not moving around, cause a wobble. Even if this is tight, sometimes these joints wear out and they're moving around even though they're tight, and that could just mean that the part needs to be replaced. Looking at the stock components compared to aftermarket components, these joints are different design. They're a lot more robust with aftermarket parts. They can handle the stress of a bigger tire, the abuse of going off-road, things like that. That's why it's important to upgrade these parts when you're doing that kind of stuff. Also, these bars themselves are physically stronger. They're chromoly steel, they're usually thicker. Stock stuff, while it's not necessarily flimsy, it does flex under added load of bigger tires and with off-road stuff. So that's a big thing there. The other thing is your alignment. So when we lift this vehicle, we look at the angle of this spring. So this is hanging down at full truth, right? And as you can see, because of the groove, this pulls the axle backwards. And that's just basic geometry. The length is only so long, it's on a radius. As this comes down, it moves backwards. Now, the stock control arms, they're at a fixed length. They're designed to operate the suspension on the stock height, the stock spring length. So you put a big spring in here, and now as this comes down, it's going to pull it back further because these arms are longer to accommodate for the added suspension. If you keep these stock, not only is the axle going to be pulled back further, but the angle of that axle is going to twist. So as this comes down, it's going to twist this, and that's what we call your caster angle. And that's really the relationship of where this pivot point is. So if you look at where your ball joints are, that's what rotates when you steer, and that's what's changing the angle of the caster when you change your suspension. So by putting adjustable link control arms, or there are other ways to do that. You can do drop brackets and other things. As long as they compensate for that angle change, we'll keep this caster correct. And what we want to see, if we want to see an angle kind of like this, where the bottom is forward and the top is towards the back, and that creates that natural stability when you're driving down the road. As this gets straighter for being twisted, then you're going to have that more unstable feel, which is really good if you're building a dedicated rock crawler. You're not driving on the street because it allows it to turn really good. When you're on the highway, that's not so good. The other side of that is ball joints themselves. So the factory ball joints, they're pretty strong for the most part. But again, aftermarket tires that are bigger, going off road, taking that abuse, these things are going to take a lot of stress when you're spinning this thing and you're putting a lot of weight out here that wasn't there in the factory. So upgrading these parts can make wobble problem less of an issue. Now, these are also really tricky to spot or wear when they're built in when they're in the vehicle. They look like this, right? This is what they look like when they're not installed. They get pressed into the knuckles or into the C. They get the knuckle slides on here. So these things, one pivots this way, the other one goes up and down. So they carry the load of the whole vehicle really on these ball joints. And when it's all together, there's so much pressure here, you really can't tell if this thing's moving around when it's not supposed to. So when we're trying to diagnose a wobble problem, we go through and we check all the things that aren't moving, that aren't supposed to move. If that's all good, it's like, okay, well, what's next? We can check for play in the ball joints. We can check for the alignment angles. Check for play in the hub, which is like where the bearing is. All those things are things we look at to see if there's things that should not be, or there's play in areas that there should not be. The last thing that could be is these are good, all your links are tight, nothing's moving, geometry is all good. It's tires. You see a lot of times old tires, because tires are expensive, so you try to maximize your life out of them. It could be an issue where they look good, the tread is still got life left in it. Maybe they're 5 years old. Maybe they're starting to show some signs of cracking or aging, things like that. There could also be internal parts of the tire where the bands inside are coming apart. All those things are things you may not necessarily see, but can cause problems in themselves. So the best thing to do when you're looking at all this is to kind of start with the most obvious, easy things, way down the list, and checking for loose parts, reinforcing those parts. Make alignment is correct, then work your way down the list from there on the next likely things that could possible. Let's get into what some of these components are. I know we've talked about ball joints a little bit. Those directly affect how the wheel rotates, what it pivots on. So right here, this is your tie rod. So this is what links two tires together. So when you are steering the vehicle, you only are adding input on one side, the drag link here. The drag link connects the knuckle to the steering gear. The tie rod takes that input and transfers it to the other side so that they match. And you adjust this one in length to correct the toe. That's the thing, the adjustment you're applying. Now the drag length in the track bar is that bar we talked about earlier about how it holds the axle in position under the vehicle. They have a close relationship to each other. It's very important that they have similar angles to each other and they move even with each other throughout the range of suspension drive. If not, if something's off, alignments aren't lined up, things like that, if you're driving down the road, you get a bump, and you want to steer on you, that's what we call a bump steer. The other issue is if this thing is a different length with weird geometry when your suspension's traveling, the steering wheel's going to move around even though the wheels aren't necessarily turning. So that's why it's important to make sure that these have the right geometry in relation to each other. You don't really have to worry too much about that. For the most part, that's something that we take care of. We do all this stuff. You don't have to worry about it. We'll let you know that the adjustment you're making. But you don't want to do like a high steer, flip this, without changing something. Stabilizer that's here goes, onboard tie rod. Sometimes you'll see it attached to the drag link. For the most part, it's kind of like this. A lot of people will tell you that this is not a fix for death wobble, or that it is. At the end of the day, this is here designed to absorb the bumps in the road. You're driving down the road, you hit a pothole, you hit a speed bump, you hit one side, you're getting more pressure than the other side. The force of that wants to turn, right? So you're driving down the road, you hit a bump, it wants to do this. This is designed to absorb that motion the same way that the shock is designed to absorb that spring pressure. It's going to allow the steering wheel to move, but it's designed to absorb that sudden impact, so it's not so harsh, not so fast. And this will sometimes mask a death wobble problem. And sometimes just putting that on or a new one on or a stronger one on can also make it go away, but it's really not the end all fix. This is more of a comfort finishing touch. Get rid of a little shimmy or something like that to really make it drive smooth. So that's really what this is. And kind of the last thing I want to talk about is sway bar lights. So what these do is they tie the body of the vehicle to the side of the axle. So as this side wants to come up or hold down, transfers that pressure to the other side that it wants to do the same thing. So if this side's coming up, it's going to pull on this side and make it want that weight difference or that pressure difference is going to want to keep the axle flat. Really good for on-road, for going around corners and stuff, and keep the body moving. When you're going off-road, that's why Rubicons have that disconnect. They allow this side independent of this side. Or if you have a non-Rubicon model, you have manual disconnect. Take these off. It allows the same thing to happen. More fluid. That's important. This really doesn't have any effect on the death wobble, steering, or anything like that. I do get that question sometimes, but it's not really. You take these off, drive down the road. It's not really going to affect the handling other than body. So not really a wobble concern. I get that asked at the time that this comes off or it's broken. Exactly what happened on me. My wobble problem. It really shouldn't affect. I didn't have one of my Jeep, but it doesn't help. Also, forgot about the steering under here. So if you look under here, I mentioned the steering gearbox. So this is where the drag link is tied in. So another thing we see with these is you got a lot of stress and pressure from this bar, from the tires, and your steering input that go right into this pitman arm. This pitman arm is what is attached to the steering gear. Now, this bottom bolt right here, where this is attached, is designed to just rotate. And there's a bushing in here that's designed to keep that thing centered, but it is just a bushing. And it can only take so much stress. So you put bigger tires on there, and you're off-road, and you're trying to, muscle that tire through the rocks, through your down. It's a lot of stress. You're putting a lot of pressure on this thing right here. And this is where you'll end up with that dead spot in your steering. So you're driving down the road, and you go to your small inputs to keep the Jeep straight, and nothing happens. That's because instead of turning this, it's pivoting side to side. And so we added this bracing here to reinforce that, to make sure that that stays solid throughout the range of motion when you're driving. So hopefully this explains a little bit more about all the stuff that's on the front of your Jeep or truck with the solid axle configuration. Hopefully it explains a little bit about death wobble concerns, what would cause it, how you go about fixing it, diagnosing it. But it's not the end all. So if you have other questions, make sure you hit us up in the comments or give us a call. We'll be happy to help you out.